Hi, everybody. I'm Will Fenton, Director of Research and Public Programs at the Library Company of Philadelphia. I suspect that many of you know the Library Company. You might have even done research or attended an actual in-person program at the Library Company. We are a research library originally founded by Benjamin Franklin in 1731. We've changed a little bit over the past 300 odd years. Now we are fully committed to serving our researchers, and we have lots of different kinds of researchers. And today we're going to hear from someone who isn't a research fellow per se, but who has taken inspiration from our material, historical material in general, and found a really interesting creative way to bring it to life. This is also kind of an unusual fireside in the sense that it'll be a little bit more conversational than usual. And we're joined by a special guest, one of the preeminent biographers of William Penn, just to help us contextualize all of the artistic work that we're going to be experiencing. So before I dive into all of that, I just want to remind you that this is a fireside chat. This is a weekly webinar series that we offer. Thank you again, Deja Brock, for covering for me last week. Next week, we'll be back again. We always welcome our researchers, whether they're independent scholars or fellows or artists, to take the lead and to share their passion with our community. And so this is our fledgling effort here while we're all dealing with the new normal that is COVID-19. You'll notice that this is a Zoom. It's a little different than usual because your face isn't up on the wall of faces. We did this deliberately. This is called Zoom Webinar. So you can interact with us through the Q&A area, which you can find if you cursor along the bottom of your screen. The rest of this, though, is really intended for you to be able to not fatigue yourself, because everybody's suffering from overexposure right now. Relax, you don't worry about your hair being up or anything like that. You can just enjoy the conversation and jump in when we get to the Q&A towards the end of this session. Of course, because it's Zoom, it also means that everything will be recorded, and we will distribute recordings of this within a week. So you'll have a video recording and an audio recording that you can share with any of your friends who couldn't set aside time to join us today. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce two gentlemen that are joining me today. First off, we have Jeff Thomas, a musician, composer, teacher, and producer working in the Philadelphia area. He worked in London while signed to EMI Records, composed music for theater and television, and toured Europe, performing his original piano compositions. A lifelong resident of Pennsylvania, raised in the countryside of Wellsboro in the north central part of the state, Thomas has been an avid enthusiast of colonial American history since he found an arrowhead lodged in a rock while riding his horse Sundance through the heart of the Pennsylvania wilds as a mere youth. I love that writing there. Nice purple prose. His Stride 10-9 recording studio is located in Havertown, PA, where he records and produces jazz bands and world music direct to analog tape. We also have the distinct pleasure of welcoming Dr. Andrew R. Murphy, Professor of Political Science at Virginia Commonwealth University, and notably the author of William Penn, A Life, published by Oxford University Press in 2018. Thank you both for joining me. I think we were talking a little bit about this before we went live, but one of the things that's neat about this whole story behind this project is that this is a passion for Jeff. And it just so happened that Jeff and Andrew had met each other at a Library Company event that was at the Art Street Meeting House maybe a year ago. So it's a small world. Welcome.
Yeah. Hi there. Andy, hey Will.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really excited that Andy was able to join us. I'm going to plug his book. You should buy it. It's on Amazon. It's awesome. It's called William Penn, A Life. It's funny. I don't know if I told you this, Will. Yesterday when we were talking about it, your book has been on my bookshelf over there. And I was thinking, we were talking and I thought I looked over and I saw the book and I thought, super cool if I could get this guy to chat with at some point. Yeah. And then the next thing I hadn't said it and you.
All you got to do is ask.
This is like the highlight of my COVID. Pretty excited.
All you had to do is ask.
I was nervous. I was intimidated by your fame. Yeah, so really I guess where I came to think of writing a choral piece on this, on William Penn, I had initially been trying to think of something I could do to talk about Pennsylvania and where we came from and as a state. And I had been thinking about doing it about farming. I'm from a really small town where there's lots of farming, and it is an important part of the economy in the state, and it used to be an even bigger part of the economy, and farms have been dying all over the state for a while. And that I could travel around different small towns and also address what's going on with our current political situation. And then it was like an inroad to be able to talk about some things. And I had a gig down the street near a place called the Swedish Log Cabin. I started to tell you this earlier. And it's in Darby. It's one of the oldest, maybe the oldest log cabin in the United States. And it's still there. And I went and checked it out, and I just started digging more into the history of Pennsylvania. And one thing led to another, and I landed on this letter that William Penn wrote to the Lenape Indians in 1681. And I thought I just changed my entire trajectory of the piece. I actually had a lot written for this farming choral piece, and I just put the brakes on that. And I thought it would be great just to write a piece using the text, almost exactly the text. It's kind of, I cut it up a bit. I can read a little bit. Oh, let me share my screen here.
Yeah, and while you're sharing your screen, Jeff, I just wanted to let everybody know that if you look at the chat feature, I've dropped in a few links. One is, importantly, a link to Angie's book, but also we have links to the primary source material that Jeff's talking about here, which is at our sister repository, the Historical Society of Pennsylvania.
Hey, Andy, can you, before I read the letter, can you talk just a little bit about it? Just what's going on and how old are you? What was just some of the circumstances?
Sure. Yeah. It's as you say, it's a remarkable letter. October 1681 is the date. Just to give a very brief crash course in what had gone before, the first recorded petition we have of Penn seeking a colonial charter for Pennsylvania is May of 1680. A long series of negotiations ensues with various parties weighing in. He finally gets the charter in March of 1681. And so that's then what, 5-6 months, whatever. So in between his receiving the charter in March of 1681 and writing this letter, it's a flurry of activity. He is 36, 37 years old, still quite the young, energetic, young radical. But he enters into this, and so he would actually journey to Pennsylvania in this summer of 1682. So he's kind of midway between when he gets the colony and when he finally departs England. And this is just a blitzkrieg of activity. He's trying to sell land. He's trying to plan the city layout of Philadelphia. He's recruiting settlers. He's drafting constitutions. He's writing in correspondence to a variety of other people involved in the colonial enterprise. And so he's just doing all kinds of stuff. And the papers that are at the Library Company and the Historical Society, I mean, you have everything from long dozens of drafts of founding documents to very small receipts for, £5 for 5,000 acres and everything in between. So it's a fertile and a visionary time for him. He's really got a sort of aspiration for what he wants to be, what he wants the place to be. You've probably heard, most of the folks who are with us tonight have heard the phrase seed of a nation and holy experiment. A lot of debate over what that meant, but those phrases come from Penn's correspondence during this very same time. So it's really a very, there's a lot of activity going on.
Yeah. So I'm gonna read a bit of the letter, and then I'll read a bit. I'll put up on the screen what I ended up doing to get the text to work for the choral piece. Maybe I'll read a little bit of it here. He says, "My friends, there is one great God and power that has made the world and all things therein, to whom you and I and all people owe their being and well-being, and to whom you and I must one day give an account for all we do in this world. This great God has written his law into our hearts, by which we are taught and commanded to love and help and do good to one another, and not to harm and mischief one unto another. Hey, Will, where was the part that you said, the consent part? Where is that down here? Is it the second paragraph? He's talking about how he's basically writing this to the Lenape, right? But there's,
Right.
and he basically is saying, I mean, he can't think that they're going to get this, dude, does he? Does he think anyone's going to read this? I've been confused by that. I haven't heard an answer on that. You know, is he thinking, yeah, these Lenape folks are going to love this letter I've written to them?
I'm looking at your document right now, which is a little bit smaller on my screen, trying to find it.
Yeah.
Well, he talks about wanting their consent, right? But in the letter. But the point is, he doesn't really get it, and whether or not he would have done it, he would have continued on with his project is probably.
Yeah. So writing about the province, and you know, he's talking about the Pennsylvania province and what will be the Pennsylvania province. He says, "But I desire to enjoy it with your love and consent." So this is land that is, you know, ostensibly been bequeathed to him by the king, but he's still asking for consent, whether or not he's being fully, you know, honest here about whether he expects consent or whether, you know, he would actually turn away if they were said, if the Delaware leader said, no, we're not giving you consent.
I want to play a little bit in a second, but really the point I was writing about this was I just liked the fact that he was a peacenik activist, really, in one way, in a time where that was not that popular, as you know, and he was trying to create this place where people would be treated fairly. I mean, I know there's lots of other things, but I thought his vision as a 36-year-old was pretty great. He paid for it a lot by going to jail often, you know, for his worldview. So I then took the letter, it's kind of long, and I broke into sections, and the green thing to, I don't know, see, I started, there's one great God, and I'm just gonna play the intro. Is that okay? I'm gonna play that a little bit. Oh, by the way, this is a totally demo form. It's me singing two of the parts, and a really amazing singer from Philly named Katie Avery, and she's a soprano and an alto, and then an amazing tenor named Dan Taylor. So they came and they helped. My goal by this point was to have been starting performing it. That was the whole thing. And now I haven't, you know, because of this thing, no musicians are actually really getting together. So I haven't put it together. I just have the demo version. Let's see. There is one great God that has made the world and all things therein. There is one great God. There is one great God. There is one great God. There is one God. There is one. There is one great. There is one great God. There is one great. There is one. There is one God. There is one God. There is one great 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 God. There is one God. Oh, one God. Oh, one great God. Hear that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So let me just talk a tiny bit about what's going on here. This program I'm using is called Pro Tools, and there's all these tracks. I don't know if you can see that I'm clicking on the left-hand side. These are different parts. This is the alto part. Here's the soprano part. Here's where Dan comes in the tenor. Here's another tenor part. Restarting. It does this linear timeline thing. So that first section was just 1 minute and 26 seconds long. I can see all that written there. how I've organized the piece is, you know, it's 1681, so the music isn't too complicated yet. I say that way, but I was trying to kind of evoke a certain feeling with the music on the time period. As the piece goes on, it gets more complicated and not too crazy. It gets a little atonal at times, but since what I'm trying to do is go from, I'm trying to interpret the idea of the text with music. It starts out pretty tonal, and by the end of each section, it builds into something kind of crazy, and then it goes on to the next section. So what I was thinking about here was, after that section was a little bit, I was just wondering, Andy, if you could talk a little bit about, just a couple minutes, about his activism. He's a Quaker, and what does that mean? You know, I know.
Right.
You know,
Yeah, it was a great act of youthful rebellion when Penn became a Quaker. His father was a very well-connected naval hero, naval officer, and was grooming his oldest son to a namesake to take his sort of place in English society. And that would have involved remaining a member of the Church of England, attending Oxford University, or getting a degree of some sort. Penn goes to Oxford when he's 16, and he lasts about a year and a half or so before they kick him out for some sort of religious dissent. We don't know quite exactly why. His father sends him to Europe, tries to get him to settle down, eventually sends him to Ireland, where the family has some land, which they were granted by Cromwell. And this is, again, the part where, as a Murphy, as an Irish American, it's not the happiest part of the Penn story, the expropriation of Irish land by the English, but it's what it is. And it's while he's in Ireland, in Cork, as a 22-year-old, that he converts to Quakerism. It's a radical spiritual transformation, which is at the same time a political statement, a social statement, an act of rebellion against the kind of ruling order. And that leads him, as we mentioned in our discussion earlier, to several stints in jail.
Yeah, a question I had about that. So he's pretty young. He's 24, and he spends 8 months in the Tower, which is not a great place to be spending 8 months anytime, right? But were there a lot of, my question is, it's a pretty big deal. Were there a lot of people, religious activists of different sects, being thrown in the Tower all the time? Would this been newsworthy, or would it be just another Yahoo?
Well, he was a big name. I mean, for the Quakers, it was kind of like a public relations coup to get William Penn as one of their sort of celebrity converts. I mean, you were likely, if you were any number of non-Anglican religious adherents, you were likely to find yourself in jail for any number of reasons. The Tower was kind of like the big jail, right? So I don't know enough about the details to know whether specifically he was put there for a particular reason. I just don't know that. But yeah, this was in sort of the, I'm sorry.
He was enough of an activist to get, I'm saying, I guess as I've been researching this, I wonder, did it not have to be a big deal? You just get thrown in the Tower for saying anything on the street corner, or was this wow, that was a pretty big deal for anyone?
Well, he was. There were his various imprisonments came about either through his writing or his speaking, and so they tended, sort of as a result of public. He wrote a book that was considered to be blasphemous. That landed him in the Tower. A couple years later, he was very famously arrested for preaching in the street, unauthorized preaching, and that was the prosecution that really made him a superstar, even though he had a famous name. The jury refused to.
And was he preaching? Was it just basically be peaceful? Is that the main gist of what he would have been as a Quaker at the time? What he had been saying?
Well, it's interesting, and I often encounter this when I talk to Quaker meetings, sort of contemporary Quaker meetings, that the notion of what it would have looked like to be a Quaker in the 17th century is of course there are continuities, but in terms of style, maybe you might say, the early Quakers were quite quite passionate in sort of denunciation mode. They were fond of interrupting Anglican church services, denouncing priests during the middle of their sermons, sort of calling down judgment on people. So this was a very disruptive, contentious, in-your-face group. We think of peace testimony, of course, the peace testimony was there from the beginning about bearing weapons and so on. But in terms of their sort of interpersonal style, they were quite willing to mix it up.
Interesting. Well,
Yeah, and I am gonna jump in there just really quickly and add that, you know, like I think the Quakerism that we contemporary audiences think about is sort of the Quakerism that's forged in the 18th century, the Quietist Quakers.
Yeah.
The Quakers of the 17th century, and we're at the tail end here, are much more emotive, much more disruptive. Hence the term, you know, Quakers. They're quaking in delight. It's a visceral thing, you know. So it's a different group of friends.
You know,
and Quaker meetings can go on for hours. I mean, hours of just emotive speaking, as Will's talking about.
Well, you know, also in writing this, one thing I've been thinking a lot about, talking about where our state came from, is, you know, what I often feel. Will, you and I talked about this a while ago, right? I often feel like we Americans tend to get so bent out of shape, right? So something happens in Arizona, or something happens in Portland, or elsewhere, whereas we think, you know, we really could make some serious change in our state if we got that bent out of shape as Penn was getting, marching to Harrisburg en masse. You know, we could make some serious dents in how we want our state to be. And that's one thing I was finding interesting. Like, he was willing to be such a pain in the neck of the authorities that he would go to jail for it. I thought that was kind of an interesting, and so I thought it was interesting considering the next section, I'm going to play it, in his letter, is the part that is to, you know, we have to, at the end of time, at the end of the world and end of our lives, we have to give an account to everything we've done. And so then he starts to say later that he thinks that what that means is to be friendly and peaceable and just, you know. So the next section is just the second section of the letter: to whom you and I and all people owe their being and well-being, to whom you and I must one day give an account for all that we do in this world. And it's here. To whom you and I, and that's Dan Taylor singing. And all people owe their being and well-being, to whom you and I must one day give an account for all that we do in this world. And now may God commanded us to love and help and do good to one another, and not to do one unto another. All right, that section.
One of the things I love about seeing it this way, Jeff, because I had just heard the compiled version when you were first talking about this project, but seeing it in Pro Tools, seeing the 8 different tracks really gives you a sense of the complexity of this whole project.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, just speaking of that, I went through a lot of just the creative process of it. I went through a lot of stages where I mainly do rock and roll stuff, and I've written choral pieces and classical piano pieces, but taking on a giant project like this the song's 20 minutes long. I'm not going to play 20 minutes, but it's the first section is 20 minutes. And so I went down a couple different roads of how I was going to score it out. Did I not score it first? And I ended up scoring the whole thing but you know, Pro Tools, being able to do recording in Pro Tools, as you can see now, it is definitely adds something to just when you're writing things, you can sort of depend on what the audio looks like, right? You can see it as it's going by. It's an interesting way to be creative. I think I think the next question, we talked about a lot of stuff. Maybe what I should do is just play the next part, and then we can talk about the next section a little bit in the outline. Is that okay? Do you have anything you want to say, Andy?
No, I'd like to hear more of the piece.
Okay. So this is the next section here. Is the next part of his letter. He says, or else what would the, and I'm just skipping over this part. I have this in the choral piece. Or else what would the great God say to us, who has made us not to devour us, who has made us to live together, kindly together in this world. And so then that section I'm choosing to play right now is, I'm very sensible of the unkindness and injustices exercised towards you by people of these parts of the world, who have sought to make great advantages by you and who cause animosities towards you, sometimes to the shedding of blood. I think I have that whole thing. So, we got that here.
I am very sensible of the unkindness and injustices exercised towards you by people of these parts of the world, who have sought to make great advantages by you, and who cause animosities towards you, and who cause animosities towards you, toward you, sometimes to the shedding of blood, 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 shedding of blood, to the 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 shedding of blood, of blood.
Question I have, Andy, I don't know if you know this, but I guess what I've been wondering is, why was he so interested in the Delaware, the Lenape people, writing this letter to them? I mean, I was reading earlier that the New Jersey section, what is it, West Jersey, was bought first by the Quakers a few years before.
Yep.
And Lenape, that was their whole territory. And so obviously the Lenape were here. So I know that in the Virginia province, territory, and New England, they had been having problems with uprising with native peoples. Is that true? There had been a lot of issues with those colonies. So I guess, was he just saying, look, I guess he had to have been aware of that.
Yeah, you talked about his activism earlier. One of the real pieces of his activism in England was as a member of the Meeting for Sufferings, which was a Quaker group that was charged with gathering all the sort of stories of persecution and so on. And so a lot of what that involved for Penn was writing. There's lots of correspondence to places like Barbados, New England, Maryland, and sort of gathering the treatment of the Quakers there. And in the process of doing that, he certainly became fairly knowledgeable about the status. And everyone kind of knew New England had been there for going on 50 years now. And there was a King Philip's War, which was in the mid 1670s, was a terribly destructive war. So he was pretty well informed about sort of the colonial landscape. Certainly knew that the New England Puritans had been harshly punished Quakers themselves, as well as engaged in some real genocidal behavior, and wants to separate his aspirations from those.
And can I jump in there, because this raises, I think, a really interesting point, because so often when we're thinking about Penn, we're thinking about it as an origin story. We think about it because of the
Right.
engraving, or the
Yeah.
you know the sort of beginning of the peaceable kingdom. And I think what's interesting about this letter is it gestures towards a history that often doesn't get rolled into that origin story, because he's saying, I am sensible that there have been injustices committed by people of these parts, not the people in Virginia, not the people in New England, but the people in. So it imagines
English folk.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm curious, Andy, if you could talk a little bit about who is in the Pennsylvania area, this region, before Penn comes along.
Right, sure. And the reason I kept looking to my side here is I was looking to see whether Gene Soderlund's book was in my house. I think it's in my office, which means it's all locked down. I can't get to it. But Gene Soderlund's book, Lenape Country, is the go-to. I can't praise that book. And I don't know how to put a link in the chat.
I'll put it up.
I'll certainly do that. Gene Soderlund's book, which came out 4 or 5 years ago at the most, it's quite recent, called Lenape Country, Delaware Valley before William Penn. So Penn comes in at about chapter 5 or 6. You have a long history, a 50, 60-year history of Dutch, Swedes, Finns, English, Germans. And part of the argument of the Soderlund book is that this creates a kind of polyglot, eclectic population of Europeans with whom the Lenape come to a certain kind of détente or a modus vivendi or something, focused a lot on trading relationships and so on. And so I can do, best I can do is refer people to that book, because not only is it a wonderful book, it's rather easily it's an accessible book, and it's just packed with information. So, and there's a whole range, and this is part of the Dutch. The Dutch are in charge of this, hold this for a while, and the English take it back, as we mentioned earlier.
Well, it's
so
crazy.
a lot going on.
Yeah, and I said that's when when I saw the Swedish log cabin, and then I was like,
Right.
I really didn't know. I mean, I knew the Swedes. Well, we have lots of names that are Swedish names around here, right?
Exactly.
And I knew that the Swedes had been here, but I didn't realize they'd been here for 50 years before.
And some of them are then brought on by Penn as translators for the Lenape, because they actually have been involved in these trading relationships.
Yeah, and then the Swedes are here and they get beat out by the Dutch. So then that's part of the people that are in Pennsylvania, right? Did the Dutch have a big presence in Pennsylvania at that point?
Yeah, I mean, especially because Pennsylvania originally included what we now know of as Delaware, right? Those were called the lower counties. And those were a sort of, again, a multi-European, multi-ethnic kind of European polyglot set of settlements.
I was talking to Curtis Zeniga, who is the tribal historian for the Lenape in Oklahoma.
So he's with the Delaware tribe down in Oklahoma.
Delaware.
But he's also the co-director of the Lenape Center based in Manhattan.
Okay. And he gave me a statistic that said in 1524, they estimate that there was between 15,000 and 20,000 Lenape people living in this general area.
Yeah.
And then they say by 1776, there was a census, and they know there was between 3,000 or 4,000 of them left. And then by 1869, they know there were 985 left.
Yeah.
So there was
it leaves you speechless.
Well, and honest, think about it, like the fact that, like, what's the statistic that when Benjamin Franklin came to Philadelphia the first time, there was like 2,000 people, something like that. Not a lot of people, less people that went to my first college. But 20,000 native people living here, down to 985. It's a big, it's a big loss. So yeah, I did think that was interesting that he was writing directly to these people that were here, that knowing what the whole culture had been up until the time he became the proprietor of the state. Will, did you say something earlier when we were chatting that I thought was interesting, that it wasn't his to be given to, right? Is that what, right? What?
Mhm.
Yeah, it wasn't his in the first place,
That's why he's asking for their love and consent, because there's a tacit acknowledgement there that maybe they don't actually own this land in the way that the king envisioned it. And I
Yeah.
think one of the things that's powerful about your composition is that you encompass that shift towards that broken promise, because there's this very sort of optimistic ideology that undergirds the first half of what you've played for us, but then you've managed to integrate into this letter the part that doesn't live up to that promise.
Let me share the screen again, and I'll play the next section. It's just, what did I do with it? It is the part that says, oh, it's just in the letter, he's saying all this, he knows that people have taken a lot of advantage of you and have treated you badly and shed your blood. And then he says, I thought his word here, this has made the great God angry, was pretty interesting. So I wrote the section here for that. Let's see.
This has been the great God angry. This has been the great God angry. And the great God angry. The great God, the great God, the great God angry.
I'm actually pretty excited about getting this to be performed with a big group of people singing it. It's been fun. This whole putting this presentation was fun for me because it's just been living in my computer, for a little while now since everything's been shut down, and it was fun. It's been fun to revisit it. One thing I thought was interesting too is in his letter, his resolution. He's resolving to live peacefully. He says, in a part that I don't have, but I'm not playing for you, it's in the choral piece, he says, this has made all these people have treated you this way, but I'm not such a man. I have great love and regard towards you. I desire to win and gain your friendship by a kind, just, and peaceful life. Peaceable life, he says.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because I can really, I guess it's easy to romanticize some things, but the time period, it was October, right? I just lost that when that was. It was cold and damp and dreary, maybe in London, rainy. And he's writing this. He's been beaten up a lot by being thrown in jail, and he still has this singular vision to say to these people. What I thought is interesting is that he's writing it from a personal perspective. He has also been treated poorly, right? He's been abused. He's very privileged. Maybe he's, and so I thought that he actually feels, it sounds to me like he has a lot of empathy and isn't just trying to say, how can I make a lot of money out of this thing? Where that does enter into it though, doesn't it? I mean, that is a part of it. He is saying how I'd be psyched if I got rich off this and pay off some family debts. But I also think it's complicated because I think he didn't need to write the letter, right? So I think he was a 37-year-old that really felt these things. One of the things that he has in July, he writes the state constitution, and one of the things that he says in it in July 11th, 1681, it's a document setting the conditions for purchasing land. It says, 13thly, that no man shall by any ways or means in word or deed affront or wrong any Indian, but he shall incur the same penalty of the law as if he committed against a fellow planter. And 14thly, that all differences between the planters and the natives shall also be ended by 12 men, that is 6 planters and 6 natives. 15thly, that the Indians shall have liberty to do all things related to the improvement of their ground and providing sustenance for their families that any of the planters shall enjoy. I thought that was he's thought a lot about it. He has and that was the other thing. It's like interesting. They're saying that, he's taking a lot of his he's taking a lot of information right from John Locke, and he's also saying we want the Constitution to be amendable, right? So he's able to say we want it to change, not be the same when we come up with new ideas. I thought that was pretty interesting too, right? It's kind of a radical idea on that. I think that's what I was getting out of that. I was reading about this the other day. Would that have been a radical idea in 1681 that there's amendments? I thought that was interesting. And I just thought that then there's lots of other points where he's saying directly what he wants to, how he thinks the Native people should be treated.
Yeah.
As I am wrapping up the piece, things aren't going to go well for the Native peoples, even though it, you know, I was talking to Curtis about this, and I asked him what his opinion of William Penn was, and because you see how much, you see a lot of writing about how the Quakers are really, or not Quakers, but Lenape really respected Penn. And I thought his point was well taken. He's like, well, yes, knowing that it was some white guy who just was taking over their land, you know, and that's a good point. I don't know why I hadn't really thought about them that way, you know. They weren't just getting along. They were getting along because the Lenape and the Quakers had a lot of similar ideas. But also, the Lenape weren't of the mind to just go wipe all these people out, I suppose. That happens ominously later after Penn dies, and we'll talk about that at the end of the Walking Purchase, the beginning of bad Indian relations. So the next section I thought I would play is his resolution.
And Jeff, while you're queuing up Penn's resolution, I would just encourage all of you listening in, if you have a question that you want us to engage, use the Q&A feature. You can type it whenever you want, and we'll make sure that we set aside at least a few minutes to really engage it before we leave.
I thought since we had like 15 minutes, I would play this resolution. My resolution is to live justly, friendly, and peaceably with you. Then I'll just go right to the next section where he signs off saying, I am your friend, William Penn. And I'll talk about that before I get to it. So here's just it's just short, my resolution section.
My resolution is to live justly, friendly, and peaceably with you. My resolution is to live justly, friendly, and peaceably with you.
So then he signs off, and I think I'll play a bit of it, more of it than I was gonna, because we have some time. But what ends up happening as you're listening along, he basically how I've written, this is the very end of the piece. A lot of the stuff I've written out, left out for this thing is some of the big explosive sections. It was just a lot to mix with Pro Tools and make it sound good in speakers, so I didn't play a lot of it. There's some really, really big sections with a lot of clashing chords, and I didn't do that. But the ending part where he talks about I am your friend, I really wanted to evoke the fact that he feels it, but it's got to be ominous because it ends tragically, like I said. So I thought maybe I would do that, and then we could talk a little bit about the Walking Purchase if we have time. So this is just the I am your friend section here. I think I'll just go from, let's see how far. Maybe I'll just do from here.
I am your friend.
So
That is
it
upbeat.
kind of resolves in an ominous way. Well, not resolves. It's a weird thing to say. There's a lot of tension at the end. You can't hear it. The piano is quiet there, but the piano is playing an E major chord the entire time, and the choir is changing. I'm sorry, the choir is singing E major chord variation of that, while the piano is changing chords the whole time until it ends up on an E major chord at the end. And I think it's a decent amount of tension because just 25 or so years after it, one of the biggest land swindles, they say, in American history happened via the Penn sons by taking Lenape, by using a fake deed to rip off 1,200,000. Is it one? It's a big number. 1,200,000. How many acres is it?
Oh, yeah.
I just
I'm having a little trouble hearing you, Jeff.
Yeah, your audio probably got dropped down by that chorus, so I might ask you to turn up your mic just a touch.
Oh, really? Okay. You guys talk amongst yourself. I will find it.
But maybe I can ask while you're adjusting your volume, Andy, can you talk a little bit about what follows this letter? I mean, like, what has happened in Pennsylvania between 1681 and 1737?
Well, he's not there nearly as long as he expects to be. And again, whether or not it was a realistic aspiration that he articulated in the letter, given the fact that he's only there for 4 years total over the rest of his life, place develops in ways that are really kind of beyond his control. His secretary, James Logan, who does stay there, gets fabulously wealthy by speculating on land. And then engineers with Penn's sons this walking purchase that Jeff was just talking about in 1737, which is, as I think you used the word, a swindle. It's nothing more than a swindle. And it doesn't come out of nowhere. There's sort of indications of this, but it's, the place develops in lots of ways because he's just not there.
Right. It's 1,200,000 acres that they take from the Lenapes. And just to touch base on that, the walking purchase is, they said the Penns negotiated with the Lenape that they could add on to the property that they owned of Pennsylvania by the amount of time you could walk in a day and a half.
Yep.
So
they basically forged a purported treaty that had engaged him with some. Basically it's a forgery.
That's why it's called.
Yeah,
that's why it's called.
Yeah. Well, so but what I'm hoping to do, what my goal is, after everything opens up again, is to have this in 3 parts. This is the letter. The next section is the walking purchase that I've been working on a text with a really great poet who teaches at Seton Hall named Mark Svenvold. And then I'm doing a Lenape response to it. And I had been trying to figure out, it took me a while to land on the walking purchase. It's such a big deal. I mean, what my next section was going to be. And then the walking purchase just changed so many things with relationships with the Lenape, and it just really sent things downhill. The goal is for this whole thing is to be able to finish it and then have exactly what we're doing right now, have it being performed in churches or communities, smaller communities, and have a discussion that happens. And because I think it's an amazing part of our history as Pennsylvanians, as the country too. And like you said earlier, Will, it's like so much gets focused on what happens in the Revolutionary War in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, but there's some pretty amazing stuff, as you've written in your book, William Penn, a Life, Andy. Some amazing things that happened, of course, beforehand, and it's worth us knowing as Pennsylvanians. I think would be great to know where we came from. That's part of the big goal here, is to just figure out how to reach more people or explain to people what this message was that William Penn, his vision for the state was. And And I think it's a good one. And I think something we could still, it would be great to adhere to or go back to if we can somehow figure that out, you know?
So Jeff, we have a few questions, one of which we've already sort of started to entertain. One is, I'm going to go a little out of order, folks. So Richard Fortman brings us back to the walking purchase. He said, did the walking purchase represent an unusual departure by Penn's sons from the spirit of their father, or were they ruthless business people, or just generally ruthless throughout their lives? That might be a good question for Andy.
That is a good question.
Well,
Go ahead. I've been wondering the same thing, actually. Well, they sound pretty ruthless because they were totally in debt, right? So they were like, how do we get out of
well,
this?
I guess, I mean, that would depend who you ask, right? I mean, if they, but they were ruthless. Logan, who I mentioned before, was ruthless, and Logan's job was to represent William Penn's interests in Pennsylvania. The sons, I would say, it's safe to say, had less personal investment in the place. You know, obviously their father had sort of dreamed the thing into existence, lobbied to get the charter, everything came over. But then even so, he was so absent from the place that the kinds of tensions and conflicts that, you know, whether or not he would have been able to diffuse them were he here is just sort of a question no one knows.
Something that, I'm going to jump in for a second, something that I have been really looking for, and you might know how to, if I can find this, is for the walking purchase, in response to Richard Fortman's question, is that, is there writing from the Penn brothers saying, man, we really pulled this off? I haven't been able to find any writing that says that, because, you know, that would.
I just don't know the answer. I suspect that there's not anything quite so bald as you've suggested. But it was simply the way they operate. I mean, that was the way they operated. And in fact, what you would often get the native leaders rebuking the Penn sons by invoking their father. You know, your father would be ashamed of you if he could see this. And there was that kind of rhetoric that happened after the walking purchase. Again, whether that's how accurate that is, it's just really impossible to know.
And I mean, the sons are quite tactical about evoking the memory of brother Onus, William Penn, as they are seeking to validate whatever claim they're making. So they're very aware of their father's reputation, and they leverage it. We have a couple of questions that bring us back to the sort of artistic aspect here, Jeff. These are questions for you. Jeanette Frank asks, when completed and performed by a full chorus, will this be a cappella or accompanied by a piano?
Yeah, good question. It's going to be accompanied by just the piano. Mostly it's a cappella. The piano was pretty low in the mix. It's mostly going to be a cappella though. I feel like I was trying to do it all a cappella, but just some sections really neat. I felt like a piano is such an awesome instrument because it's melodic and rhythmic and harmonic, and I felt like it needed something pushing the tempo forward. Yeah, there's going to be a piano involved with that. Right now I'm thinking, and the way it's structured is that there are parts that just a Penn character will Penn one lone voice. You hear with Dan at times, that it's just going to be piano and Penn talking, and then the choir comes in. Yeah. At the moment, I was just thinking I would probably, when we're playing this out, be the piano player because it's the easiest thing to do. But yeah.
Yeah, and Jeff has generously offered to at least share some excerpts of what we just heard today after the fact. So when we follow up with that email that includes the recording of this particular session, we can give you some clips of this section as it currently stands.
And right now it's written for, it's 4 parts, but there are often 12 different voices that can happen. My thought, it'd be really great if I could have a 16-person choir. It just gets really expensive pretty fast because we're all working musicians and amazing musicians I want to hire, you know? So I've been thinking about trying to pare it down. But yeah, a smaller choir. It could be done by 8 voices.
Great. So I'm going to stick in this vein. I'm going to give the last question to Arden Thomas, who says, I'm curious to hear from Jeff about the style of music he'll use for the Lenape response. How will it be different from the first section?
That's my sister Arden. Hi, Arden, out in California. She didn't know I was doing this. I think she's totally surprised. That's a good question, Arden. I've really struggled with that, actually. I've been working with Mark Svenvold, this poet. I said it teaches Seton Hall to do a sort of punk version of the Walking Purchase in more like a rock and roll sort of way, which would be pretty cool, actually. I've written the music and the melody for that, and I am debating on whether or not I would do it more like a punk song with the text, you know, with the words that way. Just because, why I asked Andy if there was any actual writing from the Penn brothers about this is I've been hoping just to use text from a person that was there, you know, writing from there. So I'm not just adding one thing that's been amazing about this whole thing, never having done anything like this from a historical perspective, is how I started realizing that everything I do is putting my personal bent on it. I went down a bunch of rabbit holes of feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm just only presenting my side. How would you even write a book like this? I don't know. You know, I did a lot of just my 20-minute piece. I did a lot of struggling with that. Right now, the Walking Purchase section could be punk songy, but keeping in the mode of the 8-person choir. I have already written a whole chunk of it that is very rhythmic because these people are supposed to be doing a walking pace the whole time. The Penns hire 3 runners, walkers, and they basically walk as fast as they can. And the Lenape are saying, hey, you were supposed to be walking. What is going on here? There's a lot of comments that have been written from first person people that were there saying the Lenape were just disgusted. And by the end, there was just one of them left. And it's going to be like, I have a big section that just sounds like people are out of breath because one guy dies, right? I'm forgetting the name, John Marshall, Edward Marshall, the guy who finally makes it, is, exhausted by the end. A person dies a couple of weeks after, severely debilitated for the rest of his life. So they were really chugging along, to get this property. So that's the next section. Thanks, Arden.
Well, thank you both. This has been such a privilege, and it's exactly the kind of collaborative boundary crossing work that I love to see, because you've brought us together. You've got a historian here, you've got myself in the fellowship program, and then of course we've got a musician, all working together around a common subject matter. And I just love to see the library company acting as sort of the hub of that inquiry. So thank you, Jeff, for sharing these nascent compositions, and thank you, Andy, for your expertise as always.
Thank you, Will. Yeah, and thanks for giving me the chance, Will. That was really great. I had a great time. I'd never done anything like this with Zoom. I was nervous about the technology, but
Yes, and thank you all of you for joining us on a Thursday night. It is a privilege, and I encourage you to come back same time, same place, your living room. Next Thursday, we'll welcome Carol Adrian, who's going to be talking about the making of her documentary series, Civil War Medicine. I hope you'll join us. Thank you all.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.